Okay, we're just looking at the time. I want to make sure we maximize our time this afternoon. I see that we have quite a bit of folks here with us. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us this afternoon. My name is Fernando Alvarenga, and I'm with the Region 9 Head Start Association, and I'm just excited to be here and be your webinar host for today's session. So feel free to contact me via the chat option of Zoom with any questions you have about the session, any logistical issues you may experience, such as audio disruption, connection, or any other questions pertaining to the session itself. Send me a message and I'll do my best to respond to you behind the scenes so I can get you back and running. Please note that today's session will be recorded and we'll be making the link available for on-demand access roughly in the next 24 to 48 hours. A follow-up email will go out to all registered participants containing the link to the recording once it is ready for access. We want to make today's presentation very interactive, so we encourage your participation. So please feel free to use both the chat box and the Q&A to send us your questions and comments, and we'll do our very best to address them live as time permits. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Tammy Kwan from Cognitive ToyBox. And I just want to, before we get started, thank you again for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the session, and let me know how I can be supportive. Take it away, Dr. Kwan.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having us. We are so excited to be here with you all today. Good afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about the latest research and trends on how to incorporate technology into early childhood. But before we begin, who are we? I'm Dr. Tammy Kwan. I am the co-founder and CEO of my organization called Cognitive ToyBox. I started this organization 6 years ago, and it was spun out of my graduate school research with Head Start programs in New York City, where I'm based. And my focus then, just as my focus is now, is really around trying to understand how research and technology can best support early childhood educators, that is Head Start educators, in the classroom. And now I'll let my colleague Nikki introduce herself as well.
Yeah, and just quickly, I've been with Cognitive ToyBox for a couple of years, and I am actually located in Sacramento, California, and I support all of our California districts and programs, and I'll be your main point of contact in the Region 9 service area, also including love to get those trips into Phoenix, Arizona, and other places out here in the West.
So here's our contact information, as well as a short video that shows Cognitive ToyBox in action. For today, there are some interactive pause points where we'll have questions for you, and we'll especially appreciate your ideas. We really do want to make this session as interactive as possible, and Nikki will be monitoring the chat, and we'll also be speaking out if there's things that we should be addressing as a group. At any time, please do feel free to put your comments in the chat box. We want to learn from you as much as we are sharing what we've learned in the field to date. Before we get started, we actually would like to start with a 3-question short poll to help us to understand who's in the audience and to make sure to tailor this talk to your unique needs and interests.
We'll probably just do maybe a minute on each question, so answer them quickly. Should we move on to the next question? There we go.
Oh, looks like we got our results shared.
Mostly teachers, which is great. This information really helps us make sure we can sort of customize the presentation to, address the questions and, your unique profile. So thank you for that. Here's our poll number 2 question. There's just 3 questions, so we should be able to get through this fairly quickly. And by the way, just with Cognitive ToyBox, we do work with some very large districts like Los Angeles and Atlanta, but we also work with home-based providers. So we're really used to working with lots of different sized organizations. And it seems like today we've got a pretty even split among the 4 different categories. So that's really great and very interesting to know. So thank you for that. And one final question. And as Tammy mentioned, that we're definitely going to want to have some interaction happen a little bit later in the presentation. And one of the points is about a little bit of a discussion about what makes high quality screen time. So don't worry if this question is a little bit stymieing right now. And so it looks like the majority basically say that they don't think that most of their students get high quality screen time at home. So that's very interesting to know as well. So thank you very much. And hopefully we'll be able to help with that, because we don't want, children to be experiencing, screen time that's not high quality, if at all possible.
Absolutely. And before we actually get started on the talk where we're really going to be covering the research trends and helping to understand what makes an app high quality versus less high quality, I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about our work on the product and implementation side. So as I mentioned, I started Cognitive ToyBox 6 years ago, and it was spun out of my graduate school work with Head Start programs in New York City. And since then, we've expanded quite a bit. As Nikki mentioned, we are working with some very large school districts, including Los Angeles Unified, Oakland Unified in California, as well as small home-based providers. So our goal really is to provide assessment that is accessible to all early childhood educators. And my focus area really is around early childhood assessment. The status quo way of doing assessment, as you all may know, is largely through an observational approach. So teachers are spending 4 to 6 hours per week observing children, taking notes on their development, and then after class transcribing those notes, in California largely through the DRDP. And what our goal at Cognitive ToyBox is to do is to really simplify the data collection of child assessment. What we heard from educators was that the collection of assessment data often takes too long for teachers to do, and that the data can also be subjective or not the most actionable, since programs are typically reviewing it on an aggregated basis just 2 to 3 times per year. But when teachers are collecting the data on a weekly basis, it really is a missed opportunity if they can't then use the data to inform instruction. So the way that our work at Cognitive ToyBox is unique is that we offer a combination of observation and game-based technology that supports assessment, all backed by technology. And the way it works is that children play 5-minute game-based assessments that are aligned to early learning standards, aligned to the DRDP, around areas like early math, social emotional development, fine motor development, language and literacy. And they automatically get reports that help to show them, for example, in the top right, an individual student alphabet report, which shows you for the student Mia, the letters that she knows and the letters that she doesn't know, as well as aggregated data for the whole class. So from here, what you can see is all of the letters that your students know, as well as the letters that are least recognized and most recognized. And what teachers are able to then do is use use these results to inform their instruction on a weekly basis. And what we found through our research is that compared to just an observation-based approach, we're returning 100 hours of instructional time to teachers in a given school year, so that ultimately you all, and I know there's a lot of teachers in the audience, can spend more time doing what you love, and that's teaching rather than compliance-driven practices around assessment. And so in terms of the cognitive toy box approach in supporting high quality interactions, what we're really looking to do through a minimal amount of screen time in the classroom is to support high quality interactions outside of the screen. Through our game-based assessments, teachers are able to automatically get the data they need to then inform instruction outside of the classroom and ensure that they're supporting each student and helping them reach their next developmental level. And so that's just a really quick blurb on cognitive toy box and what we're doing. But now to turn over to the real main objective of the talk for today. And that is to go through the latest research on how to make the most of technology to support learning. For better or worse, technology is becoming more and more prevalent in both the home and classroom environment. And as you all shared through the poll, many of you are not sure or are pretty sure that children are not getting high quality screen time at home. So really the purpose of this talk is to help you as potential media mentors to understand and guide parents and children on how to make the most of technology. Before I jump into the potential ways that technology can support learning and development, I do want to start with a really important disclaimer, and that is the best learning happens through relationships and interactions between adults and children. We all know that intuitively, but it's also backed by decades of research on learning science with young children as well as older children. And in our view, the role of technology in the classroom really should be to enhance learning. And that's why through our work, we're really working to reduce the workload around assessment and compliance-driven practices so that teachers have more time doing what they love. And that's really around teaching and having high quality interactions with their students. But as much as we know that the best learning does happen between a teacher and a child, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that young children are getting a lot of screen time in their daily life. On average, children 2 to 4 years of age are getting 2.5 hours of screen time per day. And for the first time in 2020, that media consumption shifted from majority TV to majority online sites such as YouTube and other apps. And now in 2022, I'd imagine that shift is even greater. And speaking personally as a mom to a young child, I'm actually the first to admit that, especially in these last 2 years, technology has been a crucial tool to help my toddler stay connected with families at a distance. Both my parents and my in-laws are actually in San Diego, so it's been great to use FaceTime to ensure that my child can continue to stay connected with them, and to really use technology as a tool to help my child stay engaged while I'm juggling multiple responsibilities. Thus, the purpose of this presentation is to provide you with research-backed guidelines from academia on how to make the most of technology for learning and development. Moreover, there are disparities in terms of screen time use. Looking specifically at the population that Head Start supports, we know that low-income children tend to get more screen time than their higher-income peers, nearly double at 3 hours and 48 minutes compared to the 1 hour and 52 in 2020. And Black and Hispanic children tend to get more screen time than white children. And these gaps are getting wider throughout the years. So, with the widespread use of technology, especially within the Head Start population, it is more important now than ever for guidance on how to understand and evaluate the media environment. And our view is that Head Start teachers can take the role of media mentors to support children and families in this effort. And I'm curious to get your take on this in terms of how you feel in terms of your comfort level in being media mentors to families and children. And really the goal of this talk today is to provide you with a bit more of a framework to be able to play that role. So you can feel free to add some of your thoughts in the chat. The solution here, I want to note, isn't necessarily to avoid screen time or to tell parents and children to avoid screen time. That isn't necessarily rooted in reality at this point, especially in these last 2 years. Technology has emerged as becoming essential in some ways in helping teachers, children, and families stay engaged while centers were closed. And technology literacy can also really be beneficial in helping children to build 21st century skills when we're thinking about the future of work. Also, when used in specific ways, technology actually can have tangible benefits to teacher workflow. So in this slide right here, I'm showing a screenshot of technology that is being used by Wildflower Montessori, which is a group of Montessori schools spun out of MIT, where they're able to automatically track and visualize how children are spending their center time and how long they're interacting with different kinds of material throughout the day. These automatic analytics save teachers a lot of time and note-taking, while also to support their observation, which we know is so integral to both the Montessori as well as the Head Start approach to teaching. Similarly, technology can help teachers to do more to support families. When schools were closed in the last year, we adapted Cognitive ToyBox to be sent home. And in this case study that was published in Ed Week with Los Angeles Unified, which has a large Spanish-speaking population, parents were able to play our game-based assessments at home in either English or Spanish, while also getting access to family reports with recommended activities in their home language. Without Cognitive ToyBox, parents and teachers would not have had access to as many resources to stay connected with families. And one thing I just want to note here is we are going to be sharing these slides after the presentation. And in each of these slides, especially where I reference through the research, there is a link on the bottom or a footnote that does link to the source. So you can go in and read more about it in your own time. So knowing that technology can be used in either more productive or less productive ways, and at the same time, knowing that technology is here to stay, the question becomes, what role can teachers play in terms of introducing technology into children's lives? One key role that teachers can play is to be media mentors to help children and families understand how to incorporate technology to appropriately and intentionally support learning. And today, I'm going to walk you through a research-backed framework called the 4 pillars that can help you to evaluate apps for learning potential. So let's say you hear about the latest new app through your Facebook teacher friends. How do you then vet it for educational value? As it turns out, there are over 80,000 apps in the App Store that are labeled as educational, but most are actually digital candy. So how do you evaluate an app for its learning potential? One way to evaluate apps is to go back to the basic learning principles as discovered through research. We know, based on research, that children learn best in active, engaged, meaningful, and interactive contexts. So what we can do is we can look at these 4 pillars as a means to evaluate apps for their learning potential. When looking at an app, we can ask ourselves, does this promote active versus passive learning? Does this app engage versus distract? Is this app meaningful to real-life experiences or not? And does this app promote social interactions versus being more solo or non-interactive? Now I'm going to go through the research behind these pillars and show you why it matters for learning. And this is the piece where we're going to be a little bit interactive, where we're going to go through each of the 4 pillars and give you examples of apps that are higher on the pillar versus lower. And then what we're going to do is brainstorm ways to improve the learning potential of those that may be falling lower on the spectrum. So pillar 1 around active learning, we know that children learn best in active environments. In one representative study out of Temple University, researchers showed that 4- and 5-year-olds who engaged in guided play around shapes, where a child played together with an adult, learned more properties about the shapes and were able to identify more challenging shapes than those who were engaged in just free play without an adult, or those who were involved in classic didactic instruction, where a teacher is in the front of the room speaking and the children are listening. And you can see that in this chart right here, that across both typical shapes as well as atypical shapes, guided play, children in the guided play condition did better than the didactic instruction, which is more around whole group instruction, as well as free play, which is a bit more unstructured. So when looking at an app, what we should be looking for are apps that more closely align to the guided play paradigm. And so let me walk you through some examples of apps now. So this app right here, which there's a screenshot of, is an app called Lego's Duplo Town. And in this app, what you're doing is that the player has to independently generate a response to specific design aspects. So they're dragging a block from the top and putting it in the bottom to build something, rather than following a set rule or a set of instructions. So, and what we see here is that if a piece doesn't snap into place, so if I have that round block on the right and I put it next to the white round block, it doesn't snap into place, the child will get visual feedback and they'll have to figure out on their own why their construction didn't work. And so this is an example where we are seeing that it is higher in terms of active learning when we're looking at the spectrum, because it is promoting this open-ended play. Now, let's contrast this with an app that is a bit weaker in terms of active learning. This is an app from the App Store called Letters Puppy. And in Letters Puppy, a child taps on the screen to see and hear a narrated alphabet. They're not actually able to go backwards or have the letters repeated. They're just tap, 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 tapping, and it will continue to proceed into the next alphabet and the next example. So this is what I would call a much more passive learning activity, where the task can be completed with little mental effort. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Nikki to facilitate a small discussion.
So I think if we want to dive in a little bit more and just sort of approach this idea of media mentorship and really be a little bit thoughtful for a moment about this Letters Puppy app, how could it be changed or used? How could the app be changed, or how could maybe it be used in a creative way to increase the active learning that students will experience, right? So, I mean, if it's an app on the store, you might not be able to have too much control over the app itself, but maybe you could use it in a way that increases the active learning. So maybe for a minute here, we could type some ideas into the chat. We can all look at the chat. I'll read them out as they come in. I'll tell you, one of my ideas was for an adult to sit with a student or with a child while they were playing the Letters Puppy, and for each letter, pause for a moment. Instead of just moving on to tapping and moving on to the next letter, maybe the adult could ask the child to find an object in the room that starts with a letter that's on the screen. Or maybe the adult could ask the child to pronounce that letter. So you have a couple more active concepts that the adult could bring in. And so I see Cynthia suggesting that we drag the letter to the word. So there is a little bit more activity there. And I see that Dr. Tagawa is mentioning sort of along the same lines of what I was thinking about, is, drawing the letter or go finding the letter in the room, adding letters on the table to see if they can match. So there's some nice ideas there for what we could do to sort of actively engage a student in their alphabet acquisition, rather than just tapping through the fun pictures and fun sounds.
Yeah, and I love Christina's suggestion around tracing the letter first on the screen and then in the floor or sand, because that really does help to promote that transfer from 2D into real life, which is really important in terms of ensuring that a child can actually get more from the app than just interacting in a 2D landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for all of that. Moving on to pillar 2 around the importance of engagement. The importance of engagement really can be illustrated through research studies that show what happens when engagement is disrupted. And what research has shown over and over again is that when engagement for a child is disrupted, children learn less. In a study with preschoolers at UPenn, where parents read to children either in a traditional book or in a digital ebook, what they found was that children comprehended less of the story from the ebooks because of the bells and whistles, like the sounds or the music, which when they tapped it, it made sounds and music that may have distracted them from the overall storyline. And this finding is not all that surprising. Multitasking is very hard even for adults, let alone 3 and 4-year-olds. Thus, the takeaway here is to watch out for screen time activities that have excessive bells and whistles, potentially fast and constant scene changes, or pop-up or inline ads within the app. What we're looking for are apps that can really engage rather than distract in terms of helping to ultimately achieve that learning goal. And so let me give you some examples now of apps that are doing this better or worse. Here's an app that is stronger in terms of engagement. It is called Bedtime Math. And the way that it works is the parent reads a bedtime story that is centered around a math puzzle to the child. And then there's a question in there, and the teacher and the parent or the child can press on the answer to get the answer. And this is engaging because relevant feedback is provided only after the child or the parent requests a response. And there are no other hotspots or rewards to really distract from the task at hand. Whereas here is another app called Sweet Baby Girl Daycare, where the app takes the child through a sequence of cooking activities, but through these sequence, players earn coins and stars after every step in the cooking activity. So players observe the tokens fly across the screen, and they hear a cha-ching sound after every step. And while this app does have potential for engagement in terms of helping the child learn about the different cooking activities involved, ultimately the child is too distracted by the constant tokens and sounds. And so that's really taking away and distracting from the learning potential there. And so I'm gonna kick it back over to Nikki again to facilitate a brainstorm.
Yeah, so here we can go ahead and poke again at the weak example, our Sweet Baby Girl Daycare. How could it be changed or used in a creative way, to get the engagement up with the students? And I think one thing, certainly if you could change something in the app itself, you could certainly reduce the sounds, or you could reduce the frequency of the tokens, for instance. Those are a couple of things you could do with the app. Wondering if anybody has any other ideas about how they could, increase the engagement that students will encounter when they were playing this app with this app. And I think this one's probably a little bit, yeah, here we go. Bringing in some real life examples to engage the child, like having a doll and baby food example. That's a great idea. No relevance in the classroom. I suppose, some real life skills could be learned if the students were trying to feed a doll, or maybe it would help some students eat breakfast, prompt them to eat their own breakfast if they eat along with the character on the screen. But overall, it is fairly distracting. I would totally agree.
Yep. Great. So moving on to pillar 3 around an app being meaningful. Experiences on screen should be meaningful to real life so that children can successfully transfer those skills from a 2D landscape into the 3D real world. So we know that children are more likely to learn from screen experiences, really, if they can meaningfully connect with those knowledge and activities beyond the screen into the real world. And I cite a couple of representative studies here where 4 to 6-year-old children who learned to solve a challenging puzzle called the Tower of Hanoi on a touchscreen device were then subsequently able to apply this learning and those strategies to their interactions with a physical puzzle so that they were able to complete that physical puzzle more quickly. And children, even as early as 2 years of age, can imitate simple steps from videos. And so when we're looking at an app and trying to understand its value in terms of potential learning, what we want to do is find apps that can model the real life as much as possible so that it is meaningful. And here's an example of an app that is a bit more meaningful. So this app is called Little Panda Travel Safety. And in this app, what it teaches children is how to stay safe while being away from home. So the app narrates that whenever you go out, you must stay within your parents' sights. And these activities are based on experiences that are relevant to preschoolers' lives and are presented in a way that prompt them to use it in real life through the app cues. And here is an app that is a bit weaker in terms of meaningfulness. So this app is called Baby Phone. And in Baby Phone, a child presses on numbers and animal buttons, and what they hear are piano sounds or nursery songs. And there's no connections between the app's activities, visual effects, and sound effects that correspond to concepts in the real life. And notably, if a child taps on the call button here, the screen actually switches to a cartoon picture that moves side by side rather than demonstrating how the phone can actually be used. And so I'm going to kick it back over to Nikki again.
So these are just getting increasingly harder and harder and less relevant. Do we sense a theme here, right? This is obviously not really an app that's designed to, to provide a meaningful real life experience to a child. I think maybe the app would have to be changed itself in order to create a more meaningful experience, take the ad bar off the top, actually, having some realistic use cases happen, in the app itself. Those would all be certainly changes that the app could do to make it a more meaningful, real life, relevant experience for students. If anybody else has any ideas. Yeah. Yeah, so Cynthia's mentioning that it seems like it mimics parent cell phones. Oh, and Justine, that's a great idea. Recite the numbers or read them out loud when pressed. That would be at least a way to use the app in its current form, right? Number recognition, that's a great idea. Maybe color recognition.
Great. Thank you for your input there.
Yeah, great ideas.
Yeah, so the fourth pillar is around social interactions. We know that children learn best in social contexts. So in a study where they compared learning new words from the television versus learning words in Skype or in live in person, what the researchers found was that children learned much better in live settings, so both equally well in the video chat setting and the live interaction, but less well in the TV setting. And the reason why is because there is that back and forth interaction, that social interaction in both the video chat and the live in-person interaction, but that piece is missing in the yoked video or in the TV setting. And that piece is really important in terms of learning. And so an author I follow, Anya Kamenetz, actually has a haiku that she wrote around recommending screen time to parents and young children. And the takeaways there are: enjoy screens, not too much, mostly together. And that's really around reminding you of the importance of that social context. And I know it's not always in reality, especially if you're at home, it's not always possible to have that one-on-one social interaction with the child. And in that case, for social interactions, you want to look for characters within the app that a child could potentially meaningfully connect with and start to build relationships with that way. It's no substitute for in-person social interactions, but it is a little bit better than no interaction at all. And here's an example that is stronger in terms of the social interaction pillar. The app is called Pink Amazing Family Games by PBS Kids. And what it is it's a multiplayer game that provides explicit opportunities for social engagement between parents and children. So it provides silly activities that they can do together and also instructs a child to do activities in the real world, such as pretend, act, and play. And that really helps so really the app is providing prompts that can enhance interactions in the real life, which is a really good thing to see. And here's an example of an app that is a bit weaker in terms of social interactions. It is called Drawing for Kids and Toddlers. And in this app, there's no prompts to co-play, and there are no characters that a child could develop a parasocial relationship with. And so ways that potentially you could enhance social interactions here would be to co-play with your child. You could describe and have some sort of discussion around the drawing and why you chose the colors you did, et cetera. So anything to kind of facilitate or prompt discussion here would help to enhance it. So that, in a nutshell, is the 4-pillar framework that can help you to guide media decisions for children and families. As media mentors, in addition to providing good recommendations, it is also best practice to model developmentally appropriate uses of technology within your classroom. And we've built Cognitive ToyBox to help teachers to do just that when they're in the classroom. So what I'm going to do for you now is quickly demo to you what a Cognitive ToyBox game looks like. And what we can then do is go through the different aspects that relate to the 4 pillars and how we designed it intentionally to promote learning within the app. So I'm just going to switch gears here really quickly over to our app. And so I pulled up, this is what our app looks like. If you want to assess a child like Aiden, you can click Start Game here. You see all of the different game-based assessments that we have, and they're color-coded based on domain. They measure things in state that are important. They measure aspects of school readiness that are aligned to state standards. So you have game-based assessments around social and emotional development, around language and literacy, cognition, fine motor development, approaches to learning. Let's say I wanted to assess a child on connects numbers with quantities. Me as a teacher, I would click on that. I have the ability to assess in either English or in Spanish if that's their home language. I can click Start here.
Can you touch the number that shows how many balls there are?
The game always starts with a tutorial to ensure that the child understands how to play the game before it jumps into the actual assessment. So this is to ensure that the child understands how to play before we actually go into understanding the content piece. So this is the only place where they'd actually get feedback if they got it incorrect.
Can you touch the number that shows how many elephants there are?
And then beyond that, we jump into the actual assessment, and the assessment is adaptive. It'll first go through connects numbers to quantities 1 through 5 before it goes into 6 through 10. And here we've built in a lot of elements into the user interface to make it a little bit more socially interactive. So if you press pause here, for example, and a child is confused, you can talk through the scenario, but to really help to re-guide them towards the task at hand. We also intentionally have the caption up there so that the teacher can read it to the child if the child isn't necessarily comprehending it from the app directly. We also have built in some more like real world aspects to it. So the ability to, if you're in a small group setting and you're counting, typically a child will count and put it to the side. And our way of modeling that within the app is to change the color so that a child can tap on it. It changes the color so that they know that it's already been counted. And the adaptive piece is really important too, because we know as teachers, you're constantly adjusting your instruction for that child's developmental level. And we're trying to automate that a little bit so that the app and the assessment content is meeting them where they are. And the student-led component, you can see, is just 12 questions long in there. So it goes by fairly quickly in just 2 to 3 minutes. That's intentional. We want to keep that screen time really short to really what we're really looking to do is collect the data we need to help teachers to enhance high quality interactions outside of the screen. And in addition to that student-led section, we also, for many of our assessments, have a teacher-led section that enables teachers to assess the expressive components of a skill, like connects numbers with quantities. In this case, a teacher does sit one-on-one with the child, and what they'll do is they'll say, name these numbers, and then there's really clear criterion on the bottom as to whether to mark this as correct or incorrect. And this piece is also adaptive, so when I'm pressing correct here, you'll see it's going into more advanced skills. If I press incorrect, it will know to level the child and it won't move forward. And these teacher-led activities are modeled off of manipulative activities that you may be doing in the classroom already. But what we're doing is we're trying to save teachers time in terms of needing to gather all the materials, as well as time on the data collection side, because we're able to automatically collect the data on the back end and then give it to you in terms of reports. And so that's what that teacher-led section looks like. And that's what the data collection, the assessment looks like. And the other piece that is really important to our platform that really, I think, is the part that does promote that social interaction is our reporting side. So let me just sign on really quickly to our report so that I can show you what that looks like and how teachers are using the technology from there to understand how to adjust their instruction.
Because we still come back to this, overarching idea that those in-person interactions are the most important. And so when we can provide teachers with the kind of data that they can use in their classroom to then, go to an individual student and provide them with more support, or we recommend small groups and direct the teacher on what that small group may need in order to move up to the next skill level, or as a class, aggregate the whole data over the class.
Yeah, and so this is our reporting module. So what a teacher can do is they can go into the connects numbers with quantities report. This is the game we just played, and they're able to see a breakdown of the different skills that were assessed, as well as recommendations in terms of small groups. So they can see that these children in this orange group are just emerging in terms of their connecting numbers with quantity skills. So the areas to focus on next are going to be more foundational compared to these children in the green group who have almost mastered connecting numbers with quantities. So the areas to focus on next are going to be more advanced in nature. And so that's just an example of, Cognitive ToyBox. And I wanted to use that as a model for us to think through how that aligns to the 4 pillars. So having shown you that demo, maybe we can go through a brainstorm of how that aligns to the 4 pillars. And then I'll tell you kind of the decisions that we made on the product side to ensure that it did align to the 4 pillars.
Should we go back to the 4 pillar slide?
Sure.
It was slide 16, just to remind everybody. Yeah.
And I know for many of you, you're just seeing Cognitive ToyBox for the first time. So that's a lot to ask you.
You probably want to enlarge your screen so the notes disappear.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm. Great. So
I can go ahead and jump in a little bit. So in terms of pillar 1, active versus passive learning, our app actually takes a different approach in the classroom. We're really focused on assessment rather than helping children learn within the app. Our philosophy in the classroom is that the best intervention in terms of learning happens through the teacher. So our goal is to get teachers the data they need to then enhance those high quality interactions outside of the screen. But that being said, we are still focused on active in terms of ensuring, and social in terms of with the teacher-led section and with elements of the student-led section as well, ensuring that there are points in which teachers can easily insert themselves to help with the assessment process. in terms of pillar 2 around engaging versus distracting, that is one that is a really careful balance. We want to make sure that the app is engaging enough that the child will complete the 5-minute game-based assessment, but not so distracting that they'll want to continue to play or not want to answer the question. And so that's a careful balance and one that we continue to tweak and work on. And the third pillar around meaningful, what we try to do is model. We work pretty closely with teachers in terms of the co-development process, ensuring that what we are assessing in the platform is relevant to what they're teaching in the classroom. In terms of how we schedule the assessments, we typically align it with the program's curriculum. So if you're teaching a patterns lesson next week, you'll have a patterns pre-assessment the week before with all of your children so that you have that data and can use it to inform your lesson planning. And finally, with the social interactions piece, we're really we're focused on making the data as simple and easy to use as possible from the teacher side so that they are able to use it to guide meaningful social interactions with children that can help to bring them to their next level. Any questions on that? Well, if any, review how we define meaningful screen time. I would say meaningful in terms of pillar 3 is around being able to transfer this from the screen to real life. And so the more realistic you can make it or more relatable you can make it to the real life, the better it would be for the transfer of learning if we're looking specifically at learning within apps. And then for Dr. Tagawa, he asked, have you found any good examples of an app? Yes, in our resources, there actually is a paper. All of this work that we cite today is based on a recent paper that actually reviews all the top apps in the App Store and Google Play Store, and I link it in the resources page. So it actually reviews, I believe, the top 124 apps for based on the 4 pillars, and you can look through those. And there's also other resources that we recommend where you can use to look for apps. And so speaking of that, I wanted to definitely leave you with some resources in terms of next steps as media mentors. 0 to 3 actually put together a really nice infographic. I know you can't really see it here, so I included a link in the next page. But what it does is it's a flow chart that you can print out for parents and also for yourself as references that uses the 4 pillars and in a yes or no scheme to help you understand whether an app is high quality and has learning potential. And so that infographic is linked in this first bullet right here. Beyond that, in terms of looking for apps to potentially recommend to parents to potentially use in the classroom, Common Sense Media is a good site for that, which includes app reviews as well as age guides. I spoke a bit about media mentorship. That's based on literature from the field of, again, most of the research that I presented today is not our own research. It's research that we are citing from academics. And there is a good guide to media mentorship from New America that I link in the presentation as well that tells you about the importance of the role of media mentors in supporting families and children, especially young children. And then finally, I do include some select research articles and papers. So this first one around an article about choosing educational apps based on the 4 pillars is brand new. It's just an app it's a research paper that came out just a couple of months ago. And that's the one that, or I'm sorry, that's the second bullet. But the first bullet is the foundational paper that provided the framework for the 4 pillars. The second paper is one that builds on the first paper, but also goes one step further in terms of ranking the 124 apps using the 4 pillars. And then the third article is an Ed Week article recently about how Cognitive ToyBox worked with a large school district in California to make product enhancements needed during COVID school closures. And I'm going to actually hand it over to Nikki to wrap us up.
And before we get there, Christina asked a question about our opinion about how much screen time should take place in a classroom, like full day versus part day. I don't know, Tammy, if any of the research that we were doing has some suggestions about that. I mean, our goal has always been to minimize it because most Head Start programs have their own limits, and so we don't want to push them over those limits.
Yeah, I would say it's a balance. I think you can use technology in the classroom just like you use any other tool. I don't think it's like screen time versus no screen time. It really is about the quality of the material that you're using. So even if you think of toys, there's higher quality toys and less high quality toys. And I think in terms of, certainly you don't want a child to be I would give them as much screen time in terms of as you would with any other toy. So for a 3 or 4 year old, you're really looking at probably somewhere between 10 and at most 30 minutes in a given session at most. And that's only if you have a really good reason to be doing that.
So do you want to go ahead and move the slides forward?
Sure.
Yeah. So one research that we prepared that might be helpful for you if you are interested in, reviewing some media yourself, is an example of a media review form. We do provide you with a blank one if you like the one that we created. And just as an example, you'd want to put the name and the type maybe of media, any sort of technology requirements about it, like what platform it's on, and then any notes as you're reviewing it. And then you could use the 4 pillars rating scale. Those are the 4 pillars: active, engaging, is it meaningful or social, and sort of check along the spectrum from active to passive, for instance, engaging to distracting, meaningful to disconnected, and social to solo. So at a glance, you can use this form to sort of, provide a nice analysis of any kind of an app that you would either want to recommend or not, either to your fellow teachers, or to parents.
Yeah, and I would say this is something in addition to looking at third-party resources like the research paper we referenced or Common Sense Media. It is valuable for you to do your own analysis as well. You know your children, you know your families, you know their specific needs and contexts. So there's going to be no one better to understand what apps are most appropriate for the children and families you're serving. And this provides a really helpful framework for you to think through that. Mm-hmm. And so there's a blank one, as Nikki alluded to as well in the presentation.
For you to use, yeah. And then I think in the beginning we mentioned that I'm our West Coast contact for Cognitive ToyBox, and also just there are a few opportunities that I wanted to make sure the programs out here are aware of. We do have a grant opportunity with the American Heart Association that's open specifically to Oakland and San Francisco Head Start programs. So that's a little bit more limited in terms of who can participate. But there are other opportunities, and you all might know about some others and we'd be happy to work with you to submit to any grants that you're aware of in your own areas. But we do know there's a Dodgers program that's available to Los Angeles programs. And then also there's a Dr. Seuss Foundation that's open to California programs. So just want you to make sure you know that, if money is a challenge, we do have some resources that we can talk about and see if any of these would match what your needs would be.
Yep, and if there's interest, Nikki's email is right there, and you can email her.
So just ping me if you're interested in talking about that more. And then in terms of even what we're doing coming up, we are going to be at the Los Angeles County Office of Education conference. That's a virtual conference coming up March 22nd to the 24th. There is a registration link in our presentation, so would love to see you there as well, especially if you'd want to share, recommend this to any of your colleagues. We'll be doing a similar presentation to this one for that conference. And then in addition, we'll also be doing another variation of this conference at the national, be doing a variation of this presentation at the National Head Start Conference in Baltimore in May. So would even love to know, put your yes or no in the chat if you are going to be at any of these conferences, or if there are other ones that you think we should think about going to or should know about. We'd love to find out about that. So let us know. And then just in closing, if there are any questions, speak up. These are email addresses, and then there's also a link in the presentation that gets you to a short video about Cognitive ToyBox, so you can kind of see it in action. And that always answers a lot of questions people have about Cognitive ToyBox as well. It's less than 2 minutes to watch it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for taking the time today and for also all of your valuable insights in chat. I'm going to hand it back over to Fernando now.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Kwan and Nikki, for your time and valuable information. Just before we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody that today's session was recorded. So if you joined a little later, or if you'd like to revisit some of this information, we'll make it available for on-demand access roughly in the next 24 to 48 hours. If you register to attend the live session, you'll be getting an email from me once the link is ready for access, so you can go back and rewatch today's presentation. You'll also be receiving a follow-up email from me probably in the next hour or so, containing both the certificate of participation if you want to record your professional development hours, as well as a PDF version of the slides with all the valuable resources that the team at Cognitive ToyBox share with us today. The links, the forms, all the contact information, that's all going to go into that follow-up email. So if you do not receive it from me, let me know, and I'm happy to share those again with you. Once again, I want to thank our presenters this afternoon, and just thank you for taking the time and joining us today. We'll hope to see you on the next Solutions seminar, and until then, have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.